Right then guys, here I am with my review of F1 Manager 2022. The game has been out for over a month now, so I'm quite late to the party, but I wanted to wait until I had enough experience with the game to be able to get a decent picture of it as a whole. My opinion on the game has wavered quite a bit, but after 60 hours, 72 Grand Prix and in the middle of my 4th season, here's my take on F1 Manager 2022. From a presentation standpoint, F1 Manager 2022 does a superb job. The pre-session sequences with shots of the general location and inside the team's garages, having both David Croft and Karun Chandhok as commentators, the use of real-life team radio chatter, the TV graphics, and the fact you can watch any car at any point from either the trackside cameras or a number of different onboard angles are all great inclusions. In short, it's a brilliant replication of the FOM TV style. My two drivers in my current season are Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri, although it looks more like I've got Alonso and the stick. In fairness though, I love the touch of the game changing the headshots of everyone to have them in the correct team's gear. That's a decent compromise for those who aren't in the game fully. Those are frippery details though, as the on-track racing action that is the centerpiece of this game. I've had some boring races, usually at Monaco, which you could argue isn't too much of a surprise, but I also had a dull Azerbaijan Grand Prix where my drivers were stuck on the edge of the points with nothing I could do in terms of strategy, driving style, ERS mode, or anything else to get them in the points. I just had to wait for something else to happen, but nothing did. That's fine with me, and I've been watching F1 for long enough to know that it can be a cure for insomnia. Equally, you can have some exceptionally exciting races. My first podium finish as the manager of Williams came from us being amongst the first to make the change from dry to full wet tyres at Suzuka, which put Albon up to 4th, and Vettel, who did the same as us, and driving an AlphaTauri in 2nd place. That was until he locked up at turn 10, dropping down to 7th and promoting Albon up to 3rd. And by some miracle, the likes of Russell, Sainz, and even Verstappen never got by, and so Albon finished the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix on the bottom step of the podium, and behind only Hamilton, who pitted for wets on the same lap we did, and runner-up Perez. Or how about the 2023 season finale, where heading into it, just 2 points separated defending champion Sainz and Red Bull's Verstappen. But Verstappen was taken out of the running in dramatic fashion as he went head-on into the barriers at turn 1, wrecking his car, bringing out the safety car and handing the title to Carlos Sainz. Most shockingly though was when, before he joined my Williams team, Fernando Alonso raced for Alfa Romeo in 2024 alongside Daniel Ricciardo. The Aussie had some solid performances, but Alonso stunned everyone by winning 3 Grand Prix that season, blowing his teammate out of the water completely, and Alfa Romeo nearly finished 4th in the Constructors' Championship. I could go on, but if you've played this game then you'll have countless anecdotes yourself. And it shows that this game can be completely encapsulating and hugely entertaining. If you scratch below the surface though, there's a lot of issues. That's especially annoying given that the term Frontier used ad nauseum ahead of the game's launch was authenticity. The first problem with that is the much talked about lack of difference in pace between the tyre compounds, and the fact that the performance drop off as the tyres wear is quite low until you hit 30%, and then it's like a cliff. I don't think the phrase falling off the cliff has been used about F1 tyres since 2016. I know the version 1.8 update is intended to fix this, but I haven't played the game since it came out, certainly not at the time of me recording this. Regardless, it doesn't change the fact that for a long time there were the overpowered one-stop strategies that gave me my first points as a Williams manager and no doubt signs the championship in 2023, since he seemed to be one of the few drivers in my game save who realised one-stops were the way to go. Crashes involving multiple cars are often spectacular and can impact the races in a big way. Then again, it's not as if the animations are always realistic. In heavy impacts, the cars seem to lose friction after being totaled and can slide back onto the track and take someone else out. And most solo crashes just look like the driver didn't apply the brakes, and there's a lot of identical crashes. I've seen so many people go head on at turn 13 at Singapore that it's not even funny. Usually, it's Vettel in an AlphaTauri, to the point where they should just rename it Vettel Corner, since he cannot get around it. Identical looking crashes can have totally different consequences. Sometimes it brings out a safety car, sometimes not. Sometimes the driver retires, sometimes they can carry on. If you're really lucky, you might even get a red flag. I've only ever seen one red flag in my time playing F1 Manager 2022, and it took 71 Grand Prix for it to come about. It was a handy red flag though, since I knew we would all need to pit again for a second set of intermediate tyres to make it to the end of the race. And of course you can change tyres under red flag conditions. So that's what I did, and I assumed everyone else would do the same, because why wouldn't you take a new set of tyres? Well, dumbfoundingly, no one else did, and that gave Alonso and Piastri an easy 1-2 in our first 1-2 since I took charge of Williams. Now that I think about it, it's odd just how many landmark moments were achieved off the back of AI stupidity. Our first points were gotten after being amongst the few to correctly undertake a one-stop strategy. And then in the next season we nearly finished on the podium for the first time in exactly the same way. Our first win came at the start of the 4th season, and whilst Alonso was always in contention for it, it was sealed because Verstappen's tyres had gone off the cliff and he had nothing left to fight with, whereas Alonso's tyres were still above that magic 30% mark. It's also worth noting that lap cars are not let by when a safety car comes out, which explains how you can get race results that look like this. Sprint races aren't in the game, and neither are mechanical failures. Drivers only retire from a race if they crash out, or, in the case of the team you're managing, if you choose to take them out of the race. Also, if car reliability isn't a factor, then what's the point of having the option to tell your driver to avoid the curbs or run in clean air? Let's finally turn our attention to the actual team management side of F1 Manager 2022, since making a manager game and then hinging it so heavily on the on-track side is like making a regular F1 game and then putting a lot of focus on Beats headphones. And obviously nobody would do that. The problem is, this is where F1 Manager 2022 really falls down. The ratings of the different engines, at least in my 60 hours of playing, stay the same from season to season. Even F1 22's My Team Career Mode has engine ratings that change. And on that note, in the over 20-year-old Grand Prix Manager games, drivers could get ill or injured. To be fair, injuries were far more common back then, but illnesses still happen now, and this year alone, we've had Hülkenberg do 2 races for Aston Martin when Vettel was out with COVID, and very recently Nick De Vries stepped in and did a fantastic job at Williams when Albon couldn't due to appendicitis. The reason I bring this up is that reserve drivers serve no real purpose other than to use in free practice 1 sessions in the hope of training them up to use later on down the line. But there would be a lot more incentive to have someone skilled as a reserve rather than just cheap, if there's even a slim chance you may have to rely on them. There's no paid drivers in the game, which doesn't really matter given how immaterial money is. You take in millions of dollars in revenue per Grand Prix, meaning your bank balance is almost certain to just keep ticking up. That makes money no real barrier even for a team like Williams, which I could sort of allow if the cost cap was a consideration, but even that isn't. I've never gotten close to it, which is especially bad as the very first set of rule changes included a reduction to it. all of the rule changes in the game either aren't that exciting or don't do all that much. The likes of adding in a point for pole position or changing the wind tunnel and CFD allowances isn't exactly as interesting or impactful as having sprinklers or randomized starting grids, like in Motorsport Manager. That is an unlicensed game, but Grand Prix Manager 2 carried the F1 license, and that at least had rule changes that made a difference to car performance, how you run your team, and could work to the benefit or detriment of certain teams with things like changing the minimum car weight, restricting car part quality, and banning and legalizing driver aids. And I love the fact that the justification for one of the rule changes for 2025 was to reduce the closeness of racing and the likelihood of red flags being deployed. Even though pack racing is still as close and exciting and unrealistic as ever, and I never had any red flags before the rule changes but won only 5 races after they came into effect. Seriously though, the on-track racing is immensely fun to watch, but so blatantly not realistic. I think Frontier either need to reduce the power of DRS or increase the dirty air effect, or both, because as awesome as it is to have massive groups of cars racing that closely and trading places every lap, it isn't at all realistic. You can't switch team you're managing whereas you can in Motorsport Manager. You can't change the sponsors on your car unlike in EA Sports F1 Manager or Grand Prix World, and there isn't any form of online career mode whereas the likes of F1 22, the Football Manager series, and even Grand Prix Manager 2. That game's over 2 decades old, that's got an online career mode, but F1 Manager 2022 doesn't. Also in Grand Prix Manager 2 or Grand Prix World or EA Sports F1 Manager, any previous Formula 1 Manager game, you would get a change in pecking order as top teams could fall away and backmarkers could surge up the grid. Apart from Alonso's heroics at Alfa Romeo and my efforts with Williams, helped in part by Alonso, it's still the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes up at the front with Haas, Aston Martin and now Alfa Romeo again at the back. Also, apart from my signing of Piastri, only one driver outside of F1 has made it into an F1 race seat, and that is De Ruyveler at Haas. Not one of Vettel, Alonso or Hamilton has retired, which itself is unrealistic, although all 3 of them have changed teams. Given that it takes an absolute minimum of 8 hours to do a season and so little changes per season, how long does it take for any substantial changes in the F1 world to occur? What I find worse though is that Alonso, who is 43 years old at this point in my career game save, a full 2 decades older than Piastri, can still grow his attributes at roughly the same rate as Piastri. Sure, his growth potential multiplier is lower, but only one of my drivers accrued 2 development points in the first 2 races of 2025, and it wasn't Piastri or Aitken. I'm sorry, but at 43 years old, Alonso should not have a growth potential of 1.38, it should be 0, or in fact be declining even if only very slightly before his inevitable retirement from the sport. Conversely, Piastri, in his 3rd year in F1, should have had a much bigger growth in ratings. He's done brilliantly whilst racing for me, and in real life, he's one of F1's hottest prospects, but in my career mode, he is still one of the lowest rated drivers in Formula 1. I could easily go on, but I think I've covered all the major points I want to address about F1 Manager 2022. What I would say in summary is that I think F1 Manager 2022 is a good starting point from which Frontier can build on for next year's game, but boy do they need to take a big step forward next year. This year's game is fun and it does a lot right, the presentation style is great, even if many of the on-track animations are glitchy. I mean, there's so many iffy animations I could do a small montage, well in fact you're probably seeing a small montage of some of the particularly bad ones, but there's loads. But when it isn't being weird, the racing action can be hugely entertaining, and I do like the balancing act of developing your current car and dedicating some of your limited CFD and wind tunnel allowances towards researching for next year's car. The thing I can't get over though is, What does F1 Manager 2022 do better than any other game that already exists? If you want a solid, officially licensed F1 Manager game which does the management side of the sport justice, then play Grand Prix World. If you want a more relaxed and simplified F1 management game which replicates the TV coverage style, and has more season to season changes and unpredictability in general, including in terms of car reliability, then play EA Sports F1 Manager. If you want a game that lets you watch realistic and exciting Formula 1 races in a way that recaptures the feeling of watching a real life Formula 1 race, then try out the TV mode in F1 Championship Edition. Not to mention that it's also a great conventional F1 game in its own right. If you're looking for a deep, granular sports management game, then play Football Manager. In fact, I could easily make a video about the features and aspects of the Football Manager games I wish were in F1 Manager. And if you want an overall decent and well thought out racing management game that you could easily lose tens or hundreds of hours playing and requires consideration and planning with the off-track portion of the game and smart moment-to-moment decision making on track, then, and the game may be 6 years old at this point but it doesn't matter, play Motorsport Manager. But what do you think? The great thing for me about my channel is a lot of you watching are knowledgeable about the F1 Manager games, so I would love to hear your takes on F1 Manager 2022 down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in my next video.